All right, hello everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing a crispy bacon fried rice, which I like to do in a cast iron skillet, or at least we're going to finish it in a cast iron skillet. And then we're going to take a look at a couple of different specific things because this happens to be one of the maybe the most popular thing that we serve in our pop-up booth here in Oakland, which is called Woo Can Cook as well. So if you're here in the Bay Area, you can find most of these fried rices at our pop-up booth. We do 4 of them at least, and then we also like to serve that in a burrito, which is real fun and interesting. I actually forgot to buy burrito tortillas today, so we can't actually make the burrito. But I am going to explain how to do that, but I don't have the tortillas for it, so we can't make the burrito. But we're going to talk about everything else, though, and definitely going to talk about the fried rice. So. Which is by far the most important part. So, if you have any questions for me, feel free and drop your questions in the chat. I don't know everything about fried rice, but I do know a lot of stuff now. So, Emily, you're so excited for this one. Yeah, cool. Danielle, Maria, hi. How's it going? Hello to everyone on YouTube. Cool. Yeah, thank you for tuning in. As always, as with pretty much everything that we cook on stream, there's a recipe that goes along with this one. This was a recipe that came out over on the YouTube channel last Friday, which has been up there for a little bit now. So if you're looking for that stuff, if you're trying to reproduce the things that I'm cooking, that's definitely a good place to start and check out what's going on over there. Cool. So I'm starting off. This is 4 cloves of crushed and minced garlic. One thing I wanted to mention, since I noticed this had started happening, if this starts happening to your garlic, you'll notice that there's some sprouts coming out of the garlic. It looks like this. Kind of just looks like the garlic is growing more garlic, because that's essentially what's happening. If that comes up, it's not that big of a deal. It doesn't mean it's poisonous or anything. It just means that that sprout will give you a little bit of heartburn. So what I like to do is I just pull it out. And then once you just pull it out, that'll be pretty much good to go. I honestly, to be totally honest, have eaten the sprout on more than one occasion, and it's still fine. It's not going to kill you. The only time when I really start throwing out garlic is when it starts basically fermenting. So if it starts getting really mushy, obviously if you see that it's molding or stuff like that, that's probably a good time to start throwing out your garlic. But other than that, it has a pretty long shelf life. The exception being is that if you're using pre-peeled garlic, once that stuff is pre-peeled, essentially what they do in order to make it pre-peeled is they boil it. So they boil it and then blanch it really quickly. And that blanching process is essentially starting to cook the garlic. The first thing that it does is it removes the skin, because the skin pops off when it boils. But the second and also kind of problematic thing that happens is it basically starts cooking, which means that once it's started to cook, it's got a shelf life, and a pretty short one too. So if you're using pre-peeled garlic, that stuff only has a shelf life of about maybe a week or 2. Choose accordingly. We use the pre-peeled stuff in our booth, and it does go bad after about a week or so, which is annoying because we buy a lot of it. So yeah, Stephen, yeah, thank you. Looks delicious. Yeah, cool. All right, so next up, that's our garlic, which we're setting aside. And the next thing that we're doing, this is about a tablespoon or about 1 inch's worth of ginger, which I am peeling today with the back side of the spoon. You don't have to do this step. You can eat that skin. It's not that big of a deal. Usually if I notice that the garlic or the ginger is super fresh, and generally you'll know if it's super fresh because it'll basically still be pretty moist, because it basically just came out of the ground. In that case, you don't really need to peel the garlic, because the exterior of you don't really need to peel the ginger because the exterior is still relatively fresh. Once it starts drying out though, so once it gets a little bit older, that exterior skin, it can get a little bit chewy, so you probably want to start peeling after that happens. So the ginger I'm working with is definitely pretty old. I want to say it's probably coming up on like a month old at this point, so choose accordingly. So what I'm doing, at this point you could call that a rough dice. And next I'm running my knife through it and going for a fine mince. Very often you will notice that sometimes I'd like to stop a little bit early on the ginger mince, which is mostly out of laziness. It's not the end of the world if you stop a little bit early, especially in wok fries like what we're about to do, because once this stuff gets into the wok, it's going to start coming apart anyway. So it's not the end of the world if you stop a little bit early and there's still big chunks of garlic or ginger still floating around. It's not that end of the world, because the wok fry is going to do a lot of work for you. But if you're really committed, fine mince, it's all about commitment. There we go. So that's our ginger. If you're also really lazy, you can also put this through a microplane. That will work too. Or what we do in our prep when we do the food booth stuff is we like to put this stuff into a food processor. We actually put all of it into a food processor, both the garlic and the ginger. And sometimes it gets a little bit overdone if you're not careful, but for the most part that generally works out pretty well. Next up, so this is going to be 2 green onions, which are a little bit less fresh than I'd like it to be. So I'm going to pick off some of this. Not the end of the world if you notice that your green onions are going a little bit floppy. Like this, generally I like to peel it off when this starts happening, if it's starting a little bit floppy. Or generally, like the best way to tell is when it starts coming off on its own, so when the green onion starts falling apart on all that's on its own. That's generally a sign that you probably want to peel that stuff off. The other thing that I like to look out for, so basically what happens when you put a green onion in water, which is how I like to store them, they continue to grow. So this sprout, I don't think it was here when I first bought it. So this sprout right here, this is all stuff that has already continued to grow. I like to peel these smaller bits off because the green onion tends to get a little bit more bitter off the top. Maybe not the most important thing, but if you're really picky about it, I like to peel that stuff off. So for our whites, I'm going to slice this pretty thinly. These are going to go into our wok fry because they're pretty durable. And then we're going to set these whites of our green onions aside. And these are going to be, you will often see me referring to this as the aromatics of our wok fry. So this is our aromatics here. That's the whites of the green onions. There's our ginger and there's our garlic. These are the 3 elements that are going to go into our wok fry very, very first. And then we're going to circle back to these greens. And what I like to do, so we do this in the food booth too, is I like to reserve these greens because they're a little bit more tender and a little bit more delicate. So what I like to do is we're going to save these and then chop them up really, really thinly. Like so. And we're going to save these at the finishing garnish. A lot of wok fry, especially with the fried rices, because it's nice and pretty. So we're going to set this aside. This, by the way, is going to be the only thing that is not going to be cooked. So if you're paying attention to cross-contamination, this is by far the most important thing to pay attention to because this is a raw veggie. And we don't want this raw veggie that's going to be served raw anywhere near our raw meats. Alright, next up is going to be the only fresh vegetable in our wok fry today, which is going to be 2 carrots. Usually what I like to do is go for 2 medium carrots. This is actually 1 small carrot and 1 very large carrot, which is going to be just fine too. Just like the green onions, I also like to do a similar thing, is cut off this part where it starts tapering. This part tends to get a little bit more bitter, not the end of the world if you do end up eating that, but I like to cut that bit off because I find that it ends up being a little bit more bitter than I like for my tastes. What are we cooking? Yeah! Hello to everyone just tuning in. Today, I don't know why I just talked. Today we're cooking a crispy bacon fried rice that I like to do. We're going to finish it in a cast iron sear, and it's going to get nice and crispy in that cast iron sear. It's one of the fried rices that we serve in our pop-up booth here in Oakland, which is also called Woo Can Cook. I think it might be maybe the most popular one. That could be because it has all the most amount of protein. It could also be because it's the one that doesn't have weird stuff in it. The other 2 have spam. One has kimchi, and then one has Chinese lapchang sausage. So unclear why it's the most popular one. But if you have any questions for me, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. As with pretty much everything that we cook on stream, there's also a recipe video that lives over on YouTube. That recipe video, those recipe videos, they tend to move a little bit slower and have like a little bit more information than these live streams. So if you're trying to cook what we're cooking, that's a good place to start. In the recipe video, so originally what our plan was to do the fried rice burrito, which is what we do in the food booth. So we basically take the fried rice that we're about to make, and then we cook it up and wrap it into a soft flour tortilla with a cilantro crema. We serve that with a cilantro crema and then some quick pickled shallots. So I forgot to buy tortillas, so we can't do the burrito today, obviously. But we are going to walk through all of those things today. So, but if you're looking for more about that burrito, definitely check out the recipe video that's already over on YouTube. That's at youtube.com/WooCanCook, which is, if you're watching on your YouTube channel right now, the one you're already on. Good job. We're working, by the way, we're working our way up to 5,500 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please help. Cool. So as with pretty much any time that we work with carrots, we want to make sure that we chop these in a very particular way, and the reason for that is because you'll notice that the carrots, they tend to be of varying sizes. So here's the largest part of my largest carrot, here's the middle part, here's the smallest part, going all the way down. So the reason that I always sort carrots by size is because it helps us pay a little bit more attention to how we're chopping them. So if you're not careful and you're not paying attention to the size of that carrot, what you could end up with are errant bits and pieces of large and small carrots, which is going to end up doing one of two things, probably most likely or most problematic, is it's going to start undercooking because you're going to have really weird large pieces of carrot floating around, and then that's never a good thing. Undercooked carrot is never a good thing because it's going to be really, really chewy and like awkwardly crunchy. Nobody likes that. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So I'm gonna give this. We're going for I would call that like a medium dice. So we're starting off. That wasn't the greatest job. It's gonna keep happening. So we're going for a medium dice here. So I'm running down the center of the carrot like so. And I guess at this point you would call that like a plank, I guess. And then we're going to line those up and go downward for our dice like so. And here's the last bit of carrot. Again, so the reason that we're so particular with sorting this by size is because this last bit of carrot, you'll notice it's much, much larger than the rest of the carrot, which means that we want to pay particular attention to it and probably even chop it a little bit differently. So here's the last part of my last carrot, which is looking a little bit large, and this is generally where people fuck up, and they end up with large bits and pieces of carrot like this. This is going to be really unappetizing. You can, by the way, if you're really lazy, get frozen carrots and it'll taste just the same. I'm a big proponent of frozen carrots in fried rice, or frozen anything, all frozen veggies. Oh no, yeah, I get the camera crapped out. Sorry guys. But we're back. There we go. Alright, so there's our carrots. We're going to set these aside. These are by far the most durable vegetable that we've got going on, so we're going to have to cook this a little bit earlier. These are going to head into our wok fry very, very first. Alright, next up we're diving into our meats here. Yeah, we're back. Glad that we're back. Cool. So first up, this is some bacon. I very specifically, pretty much any time that you see me working with bacon, which is a lot, we're working with some thick cut bacon. And the reason that I like using thick cut bacon so much is because it has the most amount of fat. So all of this white stuff right here, all of this right here, pretty much this entire piece of this bacon down here, that's going to be all fat. And the fat is really, really important for our use today because it's going to be pretty critical in how we end up searing the fried rice. Without that extra fat, you can supplement it with other forms of fat. So you could add more oil if you have to, but in our case, that extra bacon fat, it's going to be what we use in order to sear the fried rice today. It's also for in my opinion, where all of the flavor of the bacon is going to come from. So lots of people think that the flavor of bacon, it comes from things like bacon bits or like the solids, the pieces that you bite into. I actually don't think that's true. I think the main chunk of the flavor, it's coming from the liquefied bacon fat, which is why you can leave the solid parts of that bacon out and then just include the bacon fat and it still tastes like bacon coming from the fat. So here's our bacon. We're gonna get this into the wok real early. This is gonna be the first thing that we do, actually, before the carrots even. We're gonna render that into a liquefied form. Alright, so last up, this is going to be our chicken thigh. So if you don't have chicken thigh, I actually don't think that there's any difference whatsoever. And at the food booth, we go back and forth quite a bit too. So today we're using chicken thigh. I like using chicken thigh a little bit more than using chicken breast because I find that it has a little bit more fat. And the fat kind of helps get like a little bit more richness out of the fried rice. I honestly have not really tasted a huge difference though. So if you're using chicken breast, that's going to taste just fine too. In this particular scenario, I don't think it's going to be very impactful if you swap them out one or the other. So what I'm doing is I'm slicing this up into relatively thin pieces. Again, as with pretty much any time that you cook a fried rice, we want to make sure that what we're chopping, the way that we're chopping things, is relatively thin and small because we're throwing so much stuff into our fried rice today. So we've got carrots, we've got peas, we've got rice. There's going to be bacon, all of this stuff, it's going to be in the fried rice. So if there's too many large chunks of things floating around, like a big old piece of chicken floating around, that's going to be really annoying to eat. So what I like to do is we're going to chop these into relatively small bits and pieces. And that's the first thing what that's going to do is it's going to help it cook a lot faster. But also more importantly, it's going to make for an easier bite. Like so. So, here's our chicken. Alright, so I'm adding this to my mixing bowl, and then what we're going to do is a real quick marinade. Let's clean the board. Oh, there's one more. I missed the last piece of chicken. One other little piece of thing to remember to do with chicken, because it has tendons in it, is that if you don't cook all the way through, it kind of just does this, which is super annoying, especially if your cutting board isn't quite flat. So what I like to do, we want to make sure that when we chop that chicken, that knife, it goes all the way through, otherwise you're going to end up with, and this is something that I've done before, a whole string of chicken where it just sort of the tendons sort of stick together, and then you have this big long piece of chicken that's sort of stringy. Which is not fun. Nobody likes to get that in their wok fry. Alright. Cool. Alright, so we're going to do one more thing before we head over to the stove, and that's going to be our sauce blend, which is maybe the one thing that most fried rices would generally leave out, which is going to be a combination of a couple things that you will probably see me add in a lot of wok fries. Also, my partners in the food booth think that we should keep this secret because it's like a Wu Can Cook secret sauce, but I actually disagree, and I put it on the internet a while ago. So if you want to recreate it, you don't have to try and figure out what our secret sauce is. You can just go ahead and look it up. It's right on the website. And we're going to do it right now too. This is 4 tablespoons of soy sauce. Followed by, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of sesame oil. And then next up, this is going to be 2 tablespoons of hoisin sauce. Hoisin sauce, if you're not familiar, might be maybe the most Americanized element of Chinese food after the soy sauce. I always refer to as sort of like the ketchup of Chinese food because it's really, really sweet. I also, when I was a kid, kind of used to eat it like ketchup and just sort of used it as like a dipping sauce with a lot of things that we ate for dinner. So for what it's worth, I do think it's basically the ketchup of Chinese food. So. Then next up, this is going to be 1 tablespoon of sambal olek. Sambal olek, if you're not familiar, comes from Thai cuisine, or not Thai cuisine, but Southeast Asian cuisine. It is very spicy, so I always say go easy on the stuff if you're not familiar with it, or if you don't like spicy stuff, you could go real easy on it. You could even omit it, and it would be okay too. And then the last thing, maybe the secret ingredient? Not really. this is what this should be is 2 tablespoons of gochujang. So I don't have any gochujang today, so what we're using is some doenjang, which doenjang, if you're not familiar, also comes from Korean cuisine. It is just like gochujang, like gochujang. Comes from a fermentation of bean, but the main difference is that it does not have spice to it. So it's basically, you could think of it as like spiced gochujang, which is essentially what it is. So what we're going to do today with this is we're going to cut it in half. So what the original recipe calls for is 2 tablespoons of gochujang. That was actually instead 1 tablespoon of doenjang. And then next is going to be 1 tablespoon of doubanjiang, which comes from Chinese cuisine. You could think of it essentially as the Chinese equivalent of gochujang. So the main difference being that doubanjiang doesn't have quite as much sweetness as you would find in things like gochujang. So which is why I like to split it with a little bit of doenjang if you don't have gochujang on hand. So finally, maybe the most important thing about this sauce is we want to make sure that we give it a good stirring. I'm actually going to switch to a fork, or you could use a whisk too if you want. This is really important especially because we're using that doenjang, but also because we're using doubanjiang too. Both of those things, they tend to clump up quite a bit like that. This is what we want to avoid. We don't want those big clumps sort of floating around in our sauce, because those things are not going to come apart when they hit the wok fry, which means that we're going to end up with big old chunks of stuff floating around, which is not going to be great. So that's our sauce. We're going to use that at the very end. We're done chopping. We're done chopping. All right, next up, I forgot to do this, but we're going to circle back to our chicken here. And then we're going to do a real quick marinade. This is sort of like my standby marinade for meats when I don't know what else to do in the marinade. That's 4 tablespoons of soy sauce. And then next up, this is going to be half a teaspoon of white pepper. If you can't find or don't have white pepper, you can also just use plain black pepper too. I tend to use white pepper whenever possible in marinades because I find that it incorporates into the marinade a little bit better because it's ground so finely. And last up, that's half a teaspoon of cornstarch, which is something that we add to a lot of marinades, especially protein marinades, because it sort of protects and kind of coats the exterior of the chicken a little bit, and that's going to be very useful in making sure that it doesn't overcook. So, if we're really committed, this should be marinating for 30 minutes. It's probably not going to marinate for 30 minutes, but we'll see how long it will go. Eggs. Okay, next up we're going to do, this is going to be, how many eggs? 2 eggs? I think 2 eggs. Yeah, we have 2 eggs, so we're going to do 2 eggs. This is going to be 2 eggs going into our mixing bowl. Fried rice, by the way, is probably the most iconically used dish in Chinese cuisine to use up leftovers. So if you don't have some of the things that we're using today, that's not the end of the world. You can totally sub it out with other things. Use what's in your fridge. So if you don't have carrots, but you have like maybe a bell pepper, that would be really great. If you don't have green beans, or if you don't have peas, but you have green beans, or maybe broccoli, all of those things, they're going to work out really great. So don't be discouraged if you don't have all of the things that we're using here. For the most part, the way that this recipe was written is because these are the things that are often in my refrigerator. So. Alright, so with our eggs, I'm going to do the same thing that we just did with that chicken. So I'm adding a little bit of cornstarch here for the exact same reason. It's going to coat the exterior of our egg, or it's going to sort of incorporate to the egg. And that's going to sort of keep the egg from turning rubbery in the wok fry, which again, also very, very useful in this case because the high, really, really high and aggressive heat of a wok fry it tends to make those eggs overcook really quickly if you're not careful. So essentially what that's doing is the cornstarch is buying us a little bit of time, usually about like 10-15 seconds more cook time. And that just sort of like accounts, first thing that it does is accounts for like if you fucked up or if you're not timing things properly, it's going to give you a little bit more room for air. It's definitely not vegan, for sure not vegan. Yeah, so it gives you a little bit more room for air, but it also like will just generally keep those eggs from overcooking. Yeah, definitely not vegan. Hey, there's Hamcharo. That is Hamcharo. Hamcharo is the one who eats, the hamster that gets to eat ramen. He only eats ramen if you feed him, which is when people subscribe. So please subscribe. This is Hamcharo. Very hungry. So last up, what we're gonna do here is we're gonna work out our rice, which you'll notice is fresh rice. This is coming right out of the rice cooker, and that's something that on multiple occasions you have probably heard me say you're never supposed to do that with fried rice. I have tested many different ways of working around this because we use fried rice. We cook fresh rice for our fried rice at the food pop-up all the time, and I'm gonna actually walk you through how we like to do it and make sure that the rice doesn't get soggy. We don't use fresh rice in fried rice is because every time that you cook a fresh pot of rice, it's filled with steam. It's the same thing that makes the rice nice and fluffy is because it's filled with steam. That's always very, very useful if you want a nice fluffy bowl of rice where you stir fry. That's going to be pretty problematic if you, for example, try and use it in any kind of stir fry, so especially fried rices. And the reason for that being because with all of that steam, it's going to introduce a lot of moisture into the wok, and that's going to end up causing a pretty mushy and like kind of like clumpy and maybe like a really overly moist fried rice, which is not going to be good. So in order to combat this, usually the best way that we approach this is by using leftover rice, which you usually would leave out probably overnight. Not the most food safe thing that you can do, and generally the health department frowns on this when you do that because you can't leave food out overnight. Doesn't matter what it is, you can't leave it out overnight because it's basically a health inspection violation. So the way that we do it, the way that we work around it in the food pop-up is we use fresh rice, but what we're going to do, so I'm going to do a couple of things. So you'll notice there's a specific way that I'm slicing into this rice, and I'm slicing it very, very thinly. And what that's doing is sort of releasing a lot of that moisture. That's very useful. So I'm kind of going into the rice a little bit at a diagonal, and that's releasing lots and lots of moisture from our rice pot right now. I'm also using a scale just to be accurate, but you don't have to use a scale. But if you're trying to be accurate, there should be 21 ounces. So the next, also maybe the most important part to what we're doing today. What we're going to do is this is going to be a tablespoon of cornstarch, and that cornstarch, again, you'll notice this is the third time that we've used cornstarch today. You'll also notice that it comes up in a lot of Chinese food. Is it's going to sort of start separating those grains of rice. So our main goal today is to get that rice not to clump up. So instead of big clumps of fluffy rice, what we want are nice separated grains of rice, which is what happens when the rice starts drying up. So in order to replicate that drying process, what we're doing is adding a little bit of cornstarch. And that cornstarch is going to start sort of like soaking up a lot of moisture for you. Yeah, make it into a burrito. Hey Sarah, how's it going? So we're adding, this is going to be maybe 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. And that starch, you'll notice as we start incorporating it, just like we do with cornstarch slurries, it's going to start like eating up a lot of the moisture in our rice, which is going to be really, really useful because it's going to start like keeping that rice from clumping together. And instead of big clumps of rice, we're going to have nice separated granules of rice, which is going to be real useful. And that's what we need for making fried rice. So there's our rice. I'm going to let this sit, and we're going to let it air dry a little bit longer, maybe another like 10 minutes or so, and that should be good to go. All right, let's head over here. So over on the stove, I'm going to get my wok. We're going to get it. This thing is ice cold, and I did that very intentionally. I did not forget to preheat the wok today. I did that intentionally. What we're going to do is we're going to add our bacon in here to a cold wok. This is very important. You can't, what we're trying to do right now is render out the fat of our bacon. What that's essentially means is that we're trying to turn the liquid, or that solidified white part of our bacon here, we're trying to turn that into a liquid form. So in order to do that, you can't add that to a hot pan. It has to be added to that wok cold, just like we were doing it in the pot. It has to go into the pot cold. And then as that pot starts coming up to temperature, that fat is going to start rendering out too. So very, very important. This wok by requirement must be cold before that bacon goes in. If you add that bacon into a hot wok, what's going to happen is it's going to start burning. And if you've ever eaten bacon that's a little bit rubbery, if you maybe got it at a diner and the diner served you some rubbery bacon, that's basically what's happening. It's probably cooked on a grill that was already hot when it went on, because the grill basically never turns off. And that's how you get rubbery bacon. So we're going to try and avoid that today by adding it to a cold wok and then bringing up the temperature of the wok very, very gradually. So maybe most commonly, or probably at least the most common way of seeing bacon fat rendered, you would often see it done in a cast iron skillet. And the reason that you often see it done in cast iron is because cast iron has this very useful property when it comes to rendering bacon fat, is that it heats up and cools down very, very slowly. So you don't really have to time anything with cast iron when you're rendering fat. You basically just put the bacon fat in and turn it on. And then the cast iron itself, the properties of that cast iron, is going to do all of the work for you. It will time everything for you because it's going to heat up over the course of maybe 10 minutes. With what we're using today, I actually have the cast iron, it's right there, but I just decided not to use it. What we're using, with the way that we're doing it today, a wok behaves exactly the opposite of how that cast iron skillet's going to work. So because woks don't have high heat retention properties, what's going to happen is if we just turn that fire on and just let it go, the wok is going to come up to temperature within maybe like 15 seconds or something, and that's going to absolutely start burning your bacon fat, which is not what we're after. So the way that I have always come to approach rendering bacon fat in a wok like this, lots of people think that you can't do it. That's not true. Is we're going to basically ride the temperature of the stove over the course of maybe the next 5 minutes or so. And I'm very gradually, I'm going to start, you'll see me reaching down here and turning that fire up. Right now we're at like medium-low heat, and we're just gradually going to bring that fire up until we reach maybe around like medium-high, and that's when basically that bacon fat is going to be nice and rendered out. Yeah. Yeah, it is good, yeah. Yeah, just when you think fried rice can't get any better, I have to admit. I know that it might be in the title actually, but I forgot to buy burrito tortillas, so I don't have what we need to make a burrito. But I am going to run through all the things that we use in the pop-up to create that fried rice burrito. So essentially, what we do in the pop-up is we basically take the fried rice that we're about to finish making, and then we add it to a flour tortilla, the same tortillas that you use for a burrito, and then we cover that in a cilantro crema, which is basically sour cream, mayo, and cilantro, and a little bit of lime too, actually. And then we top that with some pickled shallots, which is basically a quick pickled shallot that I like to do with some rice vinegar, and that's sort of like a nice, like, cohesive flavor palette to a nice burrito. Oh yeah, thank you, yeah. Yan Can Cook, yeah. Yeah, Yan Can Cook, for those who are not familiar, Yan Can Cook. It was a PBS show from the 90s. It was run by a guy, his name is Martin Yan. And his tagline was, Yan Can Cook, so can you. That's the namesake of this series. It's also the namesake of our pop-up booth too, so. All right. So you'll notice that we're at about medium heat now, and that fat is very gradually starting to render. What some people like to do is that you can add a little bit of water here. That will kind of like help things along. I find that it's not really super necessary, especially if you're working with thick cut bacon, because the fat is going to start rendering into liquid, and that the liquid that you need is going to come from the fat itself. So, but if you find that it's moving particularly slow, or if you have a particularly lean cut of bacon, you can definitely add a little bit of water, and that would help things along a little bit. The other thing, a couple of people have been asking me about the round bottom woks and using round bottom woks, which is what we're using today. You'll notice that's why my wok sort of rolls around like this. It's because it's got a rounded bottom. I love using it. It's totally something that you can make use of on a home range. Lots of people think that you can't on home ranges because they don't get hot enough. I actually disagree. And my favorite part about the round bottom wok, you'll notice, is because it rounds out right here, which is where all that bacon is sitting. What's going to happen is that as the fat starts rendering out, it's going to start pulling up where the wok rounds out, which is really useful because it's basically as the fat starts pulling out or rendering out, it's going to pull up in the center of the wok, which is where we're going to keep the rest of our bacon fat, and it kind of just helps things render really nicely because we've got all of this fat sort of concentrated at the center of the wok, which is really useful. I actually end up using that quality about this wok all the time. It's a great way of like frying eggs. If you've ever like shallow fried a fried egg like over easy, it's a really useful thing to do there. I like doing it with rendering bacon fat. Also very useful. Anything that's like fried that you're trying to shallow fry, very useful. So. Yeah, Yan was a beast. Yeah, I used to watch his show all the time. Also, maybe one of the only guys that I've ever seen cook in a full-blown cast or carbon steel wok on an induction top. I don't even think it was a coil top. I think he was using an induction top, which to this day I have no idea how to do that. I don't understand how that's possible. But maybe it was TV magic. Maybe they're editing. Yeah. So this is at about like just past medium. We're gradually, I think we're gonna aim usually right until about medium high. I don't think we usually hit high heat for rendering bacon fat, but we're looking for about medium high heat. And you'll notice, by the way, at the bottom of our wok, all of this bacon fat is start rendering right here. That's the stuff that we're after. And you'll notice the other thing that you'll notice is that as it starts rendering, it's rendering and it's kind of sitting here at the bottom or the rounded part of the wok. That's really useful because that's also where the bacon fat is. So basically, as it starts rendering, that fat sits at the bottom where the wok rounds out, and then the bacon fat kind of sits where that rounded out part is, and then it kind of just adds more to itself. So as it renders, there's more fat that renders. The fat helps the fat render, and it's just sort of like this building process on its own. So again, if you find that it's not quite going as fast as you'd like it to, you can absolutely add a little bit of water, and that will help push things along. But I honestly think not super necessary. Yeah. Cool. We're at about, this is right at medium, like medium high heat, and I think we're just about there. Yeah, I think that's gonna do it. So I'm pulling my bacon fat out of the wok. And then we're gonna set that aside, and then finally we're gonna start cranking this wok up. So we're gonna let this thing get ripping hot, and then we're gonna add a little bit of oil and go on with our wok cook today. So while that's heating up, let's take a look. Here's our finished bacon bits and fat. I like to just pull them both out at the same time. On camera. I like to pull these both out at the same time. I find that they just sort of, I like to pull them out around like 90 to 95% before it's done. And then the residual heat of that bacon fat is going to finish cooking things. It just sort of simplifies things a little bit. But if you're worried about overcooking, you can absolutely separate those fats. Here we are. All right, so I'm got my wok nice and hot, and then we're adding, that's going to be 4 tablespoons. Today I'm using grapeseed oil because I'm running low on peanut oil, so here we are. And then the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to start by searing our chicken. I'm going to use a tongs. Okay. This feels like it's going to splatter. This bit, by the way, it's optional. You don't have to sear the chicken. I don't think it's that important. But what I like to do, especially because we're using chicken thigh, but also because we're using a lot of chicken here, is I like to make sure that we don't have bits and pieces of chicken that are sitting on top of itself, because that's going to end up steaming the chicken, which I don't like. So what I'm going to do here is I'm adding this, what we should be doing is adding it one piece at a time. I kind of got a little lazy there and we just added a whole bunch of it. But basically what I'm doing is as I'm adding the chicken, we're doing a couple of things. The main thing that we're doing is that I'm making sure that as the chicken gets into the wok, it's actually touching the surface of the wok, so it's not sitting on top of other pieces of chicken like this. We don't want this. This piece of chicken is just going to start steaming, which is not good. So, and then the other thing that's very useful when you add the chicken one piece at a time is it also helps us reserve the liquid of our marinade. So you'll notice once I finish doing this, that back in my mixing bowl, we've got all of this liquid. That's a whole bunch of soy sauce plus probably a little bit of water. All of those are things that we don't want to end up in our wok fry. That gets into the wok fry. It's going to start dropping the temperature of the wok really quickly, which is not good. So in our constant and ongoing effort to make sure that wok stays really, really hot, we're adding it one piece at a time and then holding back that liquid as much as we can. And then the other thing, you'll hear me talk about this pretty much any time that we sear stuff in a round bottom wok, is I like to make sure and give that wok a little bit of a rotation here, maybe once every 30 seconds or so. And what that's doing is it's just sort of spreading that oil around a little bit, and it's making sure that those pieces of chicken that aren't centered or focused in the center of the wok, they're getting nice, coated in a little bit of oil there too. That's going to be really useful, because if that chicken on the exterior starts drying out, it's not going to sear, it's just going to end up burning. Ooh, any advice on seasoning the wok? I've heard a lot of hacks. We've also, I've seasoned now, I think 10 or 12 different woks now, because we have so many of them in the pop-up. Honestly, the best way of seasoning a wok that I've come across is that you just got to start using it, and it's gonna suck for maybe the first 3 or 4 times that you cook in it, but once you start using it, that's really the best solution to cooking. And if you're really worried, you can start cooking in it and cooking stuff that you're ultimately gonna throw out. So when we first started seasoning the woks that we used in our pop-up, I just cooked a bunch of veggies that I ended up throwing out. So I chopped up a bunch of celery and carrots and broccoli, and then we just did some quick stir fries. And ultimately, because it ended up burning and sticking to the wok, I just threw it out. So I think some of it was even and honestly, that process of just starting to cook in the wok is going to be by far the best way of seasoning the wok. So I've heard other people talk about things like gluing the wok and all that stuff. Has never worked for me. Just start using it. So we're searing this. I'm going to let that sear for 2 minutes total. About there. Almost. Got a little bit of fire there. So you'll notice that once we toss that chicken, we've got all of this nice dark browning. That's what we're looking for here. It's all of that nice crispy bits and pieces of chicken there. Then I'm following that up. Those are my carrots going in the wok. If you're using frozen carrots, you can absolutely skip this step and throw those carrots in with the frozen peas. But since we're using fresh carrots, I like to let those go for a little bit, maybe give it a 45, maybe 50-second head start or so. Yeah. Bacon looks beautiful, yeah. All bacon, it looks beautiful. It's easy to make food look delicious with bacon, I think. Cool. Yeah. I noticed a couple folks asked about overfilling the wok in one of the recipe video for this actually, and that's definitely like a big concern when we're working with things like fried rice, because when you're cooking something like a fried rice, the wok does eventually get very, very full, and that's coming from the fact that you're throwing a whole bunch of rice into the wok. So the way that we work around that is that the things that do need to be cooked on wok heat, they have to be cooked first, which is why you'll notice the first two things that we're cooking today are the only two elements that have to be cooked on extremely high heat, which is the chicken. The rest of the things that we're cooking, actually most of the rest of the stuff that's going into this fried rice, they're not even going to be cooked. So the last thing that we have to cook, like actually cook, is the eggs, which is just going to scramble a little bit. And then for the most part, the rest of the things that we need to make sure cook on high heat are the stuff that we're cooking right now, which is very useful to do while the wok is empty, because the wok stays nice and hot while you have all of this extra space here. So what we want to try and avoid doing is things like adding all of that rice into the wok and then trying to cook the chicken, and then trying to cook those carrots, because then you're going to end up with sort of like mediocre heat. Oh yeah, what do I think about super? Yeah, actually I was just talking about this to the gentleman who built our wok burners. So our food booth, it's all of the burners that we use in our booth. They're built by a guy. His name is William. He runs a company. It's called Wokman, and he does these really great burners. They have a pretty decent amount of BTUs. I think the BTUs on those burners, I think they go up to like 1,000, I think. But what I found is that by far the more important thing, and this I learned after using the Wokman burners so much, that by far the more important thing is actually not how hot the wok gets. What's more important is the heat, the distribution of heat on those burners. So that's by far a lot more important, because even if you do have a really, really high BTU burner, so we have another burner that we use sometimes. It's made by Stansport, and I think it has like 200,000 BTUs, something like that. But the problem with that burner is that because it's all of the burner just shoots straight up. So there's not really any heat distribution. And since there's no heat distribution, what you end up with is just like a really, really hot center point to the wok. So it usually just hits right here. And then the rest of it just ends up sort of like having this mediocre heating around the sides of the wok, which is really not really useful. So those are our eggs. You'll notice, so I just talked my way all through that. But I moved everything to one side, and then we cooked our eggs in the wok itself. So what we want to be very careful of is that I didn't add those eggs on top of the chicken. If we had done that, I ended up putting the chicken in eggs, which is not going to be very useful. What we do by clearing all of the space in the wok is it makes sure that we get those nice big curds of egg, which is what we're after here today. Then last up, those are going to be our aromatics. That's my garlic, ginger, and whites of my green onion. And just like we did with the eggs, I'm moving everything to one side. And then we're going to bloom that in all of this nice. That's mostly like chicken fat now. Yeah, so I don't know if that's helpful, but like generally in my experience working with wok burners, especially working with the Wokman, by far the thing that's more useful is a nice heat distribution in the wok burner, which I think, in my opinion, a lot of wok burners overlook, is that nice and even heat distribution. Because just because you have lots of heat doesn't mean that it's going to be put in the right place, I think. All right, that's looking good. So we're going to start adding, this is going to be our rice going into the wok. You'll also notice that the cornstarch that we added to the rice is going to be playing a pretty huge role here, basically by making sure that those big clumps of rice, they start pulling apart. And that's all thanks to that cornstarch. This, by the way, if you're using leftover rice, you wouldn't have to include that cornstarch necessarily. Today, since we're using, this is really fresh rice, like literally a pot of rice that I made before we started cooking. What we're trying to do is make sure that these big clumps of rice, that they break down properly. Oh yeah, you've got a big, yeah, for outdoor cooking. Yeah, honestly, I've noticed that, like, especially on like the Walkman, because it has such good distribution of heat, I don't think that I have ever turned the burner up all the way. So I think it maxes out at something like 70,000 BTUs. And I don't think it's ever hit 70,000 BTUs. I hit 70,000 BTUs once, and it was too hot. I ended up setting some oil on fire, which was really scary. So yeah, I don't think I've ever used all of the BTUs in that wok burner before. Yeah, definitely. If you've got one, though, absolutely use it, because they're dope. All right, there's the last of our rice. Once again, I'm basically running my spatula through it and making sure that those clumps break down. Oh, this iPhone camera is burning out. All right, last up, I'm going to add, this is my bacon fat, or my bacon bits going back in. And then not the last thing, but the second to last thing that we're going to add here, this is going to be our sauce. And I always like to say, this is actually not just true for fried rice, but this is actually true for basically any recipe that you will have seen me publish. Is that we want to add that stuff little by little, maybe about a tablespoon or two at a time, and then go back and kind of take a look. Does it need more sauce? And if so, then add it. If it doesn't, if you don't end up using all of that sauce, it's not going to be the end of the world. If you end up throwing out a quarter cup of sauce, don't feel bad about that. What we want to be very careful of, really with any time that we're cooking in a wok, is we want to make sure that we don't over season here. Alright, so we have two more things left to add to this wok fry. One is going to be those peas, and the last is going to be that green onion. So what I like to do before we do those peas, we're going to do our sear here. So I'm going to add a little bit of peanut oil around the sides. So we're very carefully going around the sides, and then we're going to set a timer for 2.5 minutes. So what we're doing at this point is we're basically making sure that by not moving that wok, so we're giving it a little bit of lubrication. That's what that oil is for. In the booth, we usually do that with a little bit of extra bacon fat because we have so much of it, because we're literally rendering out 5 pounds of bacon. In our case today, I'm going to supplement that with a little bit of peanut oil instead. And then very important, as with pretty much anything that you sear, we're going to stop moving the wok, and that basically everything that's touching the surface area of the wok is going to sear. Basically the exact same thing that we just did with that chicken. Because we stopped moving it, things got nice and seared and crispy. So by stopping the motion of that wok, it's going to help us get this nice crispy exterior surface to that rice. So basically everything that's touching that rice, or everything that's touching the wok, is going to become nice and crispy. So the way I always like to look at it is sort of like a controlled burn. Sear is essentially when things start burning, but in a controlled and like very nice and appetizing way. So we're going to let that go undisturbed. Do not touch it for 2.5 minutes. That looks fried rice. Yeah, actually, and I'll be honest, it didn't look like fried rice for a while. Pretty much just looked like a stir fry. I think that's the tricky thing about fried rice is that for the most part, up until the very, very end, because the rice doesn't go in until the very end, it pretty much just looks like any other stir fry, except once the rice gets in the wok, then it starts looking like a fried rice. But before that, it pretty much just looks like a stir fry. Yeah. Cool. All right, we have 1.5 minutes. Hello to everyone just tuning in. My name is Wesley. This is Woo Can Cook. Today we're doing a crispy bacon fried rice. I like to do by creating a nice crispy seared quality to it by basically doing exactly what we're doing right now, which is essentially stop touching it. Don't move the wok for 2.5 minutes and you get this nice crispy seared quality to it. So, if you're looking for it, everything that we cook on stream that has a recipe video that goes along with it, those are already always over on my YouTube channel. So if you haven't found that yet, that's at youtube.com/WooCanCook. The recipe that we're cooking today is the one that came out last Friday. So if you haven't yet, definitely check that out. We're working our way up to 5,500 subscribers by the end of the month. So if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and feed Hamcharo. He's very hungry. All right, so that's 2.5 minutes. We're gonna say a little prayer. And yeah, that's what we're looking for. So last up, the last thing that we're gonna add here. Probably should have taken it out. Is some frozen peas. So I am strongly of the opinion that by far the most important thing that you can use in a fried rice, maybe second to leftover rice. Actually, we're not even using leftover rice today. Is going to be frozen veggies. And those frozen veggies, they're really, really critical. What I even do is I'm actually going to kill the heat already. And what's going to happen is that since those frozen peas, they're being added so late, they're essentially frozen peas, by the way, they don't need to be cooked. They're already cooked veggies. And essentially what we're going to do is we're going to let the residual heat of our fried rice sort of defrost those peas. And what that's doing is it's basically ensuring that because those peas are going in frozen, they're defrosting very, very gradually, so that what we end up with instead of like a mushy pea is more of a really, really crisp quality to it. So I like to do the same with basically any veggie that goes into a fried rice. So we do the same thing with the in the pop-up. We use corn. We also use frozen veggies like frozen carrots. We use frozen pineapple. All of these things very, very critical in order to keep them nice and crispy. Yeah, what's in the sauce? Yeah, so the sauce is a combination that was soy sauce, hoisin sauce, sesame oil, and gochujang, or at least that's what the recipe calls for, is gochujang. Today we substituted that because I forgot to buy gochujang with a little bit of doenjang and a little bit of doenjang. Doenjang is essentially also comes from Korean cuisine and is essentially unspiced gochujang, which we supplemented with a little bit of spicy doenjang. So if you want to uncomplicate it and maybe not make your life so hard, you can just use plain old gochujang. But I forgot to buy gochujang, so here we are. Alright. Kind of looks like it's not going to fit. I'm a little bit concerned about this bowl. Let's get a bigger bowl. There we go. So the last thing that we want to do anytime that we're cooking in a wok, give that wok a nice good rinse. This is especially true with things like carbon steel. Because while it's nice and hot, all of those things are going to slide right off. And you'll notice we're not really going to do much at all to clean this thing. Basically just give it a good rinse and pretty much everything should come right off. If you go and start sitting down and try and eat, basically, that's what is very, very tempting to do because there's food in front of you and you want to eat it. That's a real bad idea because if you try and do this once it's cooled down, you're going to have a lot more trouble getting all this stuff off, and you're basically going to have to start scrubbing things and doing a whole bunch of stuff that you generally don't want to have to do. So do yourself a favor, do this step while the wok is hot. All right. Yeah, cool. So there's our fried rice. And a little bit of clumps. That's gonna fog up. And fogged up. It's better. Yeah, the scorched bottom, yeah. So that's very specifically something that we were trying to do. So it definitely does need to be dry. That's kind of the whole point of fried rice. But the scorched bottom is basically what makes it nice and crispy. So what we did is stopped shuffling the wok for about 2.5 minutes. What happens is, this only works if you properly lubricate the wok, is that whatever is touching the bottom of the wok, it gets nice and crispy, basically. The same way that you would essentially sear maybe sear a steak, or if you're ever seared pork chops, all those things are seared in the same way. Basically, it doesn't really matter what you're have the same fundamental concept, and that is essentially that you have to stop shuffling things. So if you touch it, you move it around, do anything to it. That's the number one thing. So you got to stop moving it. The number two, also equally as important thing, is that there has to be some form of lubrication. So today, the main thing that we used was a bit of bacon fat. You can also, I also supplemented that with a little bit of peanut oil, which also helps a lot. Any of those things will do. So I'm finishing that. That's the greens of our green onions, just the green parts. And that should do it. So I know also a lot of folks were hoping for the fried rice burrito, but I totally forgot to buy burrito tortillas, so we can't make the fried rice burrito. If you're looking for that, usually, essentially what we do, but if you're not familiar, we have a food pop-up. It's called Wu Can Cook. It's here in Oakland. We're at a bunch of different spaces all around the Bay Area, pretty much every weekend now. What we do in that food pop-up is we take this fried rice, the one that we just made, and then we add it to a nice flour tortilla, and then top that with a cilantro crema and a pickled shallot. And it's essentially two things that you very commonly would see in a lot of burritos. And then we wrap that up in a nice soft flour tortilla. And it's super delicious and tasty, and one of my favorite things to do. But I forgot to buy tortillas, so we can't make it today. So here we are. So if you're looking for that, we did run through how to make that on the recipe video. So if you're looking for that, definitely go and find that recipe video. All is over on the YouTube channel already. Yeah. Looks at me. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Cool. So yeah, if you're looking for that, it always lives over on the YouTube channel. Pretty much everything that we cook on stream, it has a recipe video that goes along with it. This particular recipe came out last Friday, and it's basically very, very, very closely following the process that we do make the fried rice in our food pop-up. We have 4 different fried rices, one of which is this one. So if you're looking for that stuff, definitely go and find your way over there. Lots of fun stuff coming up. Yeah, so if you're looking for that stuff, lots of fun new food and recipes popping up over on the YouTube channel. Definitely hop your way over there next. What else? What are we cooking next? Next, we're cooking... up next, so this Thursday, we're doing string bean chicken, which is done very, very similarly to the way that we just did to cook this fried rice. Both of the things in that string bean chicken are going to be seared. So the string beans are seared, and then the chicken is seared, and we're basically going to follow that process, except to do it in batches, which is very, very similar. So lots of stuff like that coming up very soon. So if you're interested, definitely find your way over to the YouTube channel and check out what's going on over there. What else? We're working our way up to 5,500 subscribers by the end of the month, so if you want to help us hit our subscriber goal, please hop over and subscribe. Lots of fun things coming up. Yeah, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop your questions in the chat, and hopefully I can be helpful. More legit than you get in a restaurant. Thank you, yeah. Am I a real chef, or did I learn from YouTube? I am a real chef that learned from YouTube. Cool. All right, thanks everyone. I hope we'll see you soon, and see you soon. Bye.
If you think that you don't know, never mind that you still don't love yourself. No, you can find it from somebody else. No, everybody's got to grow up. Sometimes funny how we shoot the mood. Still, will we fight it, baby? Never mind. Everybody wants to be fulfilled. They still got dreams, but they don't love me like they used to love it. And I'm reminded of how bad I used to want it. And yes, I still got dreams, but more like a junkie of my 20s, and it's breaking me down. Want to be, baby, yes I do you want to be? But you poured out your heart. You're as sweet as strawberry wine. You're bad. Glass of brandy, darling, I'll stay stoned on your love all the time.